You've probably never stopped to think about what's actually happening inside your body when you become aroused. Most men haven't. It just happens, or sometimes it doesn't, and the mechanics stay invisible. But arousal isn't a single event. It's a cascade, a precisely coordinated sequence involving your brain, your nervous system, your hormones, and your blood vessels, all firing in a specific order, within a narrow window, under conditions that have to be right. Understanding that cascade doesn't just satisfy curiosity, it explains why arousal fails when it does, and what you can actually do about it. The Better Man podcast is produced by Kegel Men for informational and educational purposes only. This is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Every episode is reviewed by our medical team, but individual results may vary. Welcome back to the Better Man podcast. I'm Alex. Today we're going deep into the science of arousal, what it actually is, what triggers it, how it moves through your body, and why it's far more complex and sensitive than most men realize. By the end of this episode, you'll have a clearer picture of how the whole system fits together, and why that knowledge matters for your health. Let's start with the brain, because that's where arousal begins. Not in the genitals, in the nervous system. When you encounter something arousing, whether that's a visual cue, a touch, a smell, a sound, or even a thought or a memory, sensory information travels to the brain. Two regions respond almost immediately. The first is the hypothalamus, a small but critical structure deep in the brain that regulates many of your most fundamental biological drives: hunger, thirst, temperature, and yes, sexual desire. The second is the limbic system, the brain's emotional processing center, which gives experience its emotional and motivational weight. These structures don't just register arousal passively, they initiate it. The hypothalamus releases gonadotropin-releasing hormone, which triggers the hormonal cascade that influences testosterone levels. The limbic system activates reward circuitry, specifically the release of dopamine, the neurotransmitter most associated with motivation and anticipation. Dopamine isn't pleasure itself, it's the drive toward it. It's the signal that says this matters. Pay attention. Pursue this. At the same time, the brain is making a continuous assessment. Is this situation safe? Is there threat nearby? Is attention divided or focused? This is where the prefrontal cortex, the brain's executive center, plays a moderating role. When that assessment is positive, the brain's arousal response is allowed to proceed. When something is wrong, stress, anxiety, distraction, self-consciousness, the prefrontal cortex can effectively suppress the response before it begins. This is why arousal is so sensitive to psychological state. It's not a flaw in the system. It's the system working exactly as designed. Your brain is protecting you from pursuing sexual activity in circumstances that might be dangerous or poorly timed. The problem is that modern stressors, work pressure, relationship tension, performance anxiety, can trigger the same suppressive mechanisms, even when there's no actual threat present. Once the brain initiates arousal, the nervous system carries the signal forward, and there are two distinct branches involved. The first is the parasympathetic nervous system. This is the branch associated with rest, calm, and recovery, sometimes called the rest and digest system. It's the parasympathetic branch that drives the initial vascular response to arousal. Nerve fibers running from the spinal cord to the erectile tissue release neurotransmitters, including nitric oxide, that cause the smooth muscle in penile arteries to relax, dilate, and allow blood to rush in. Parasympathetic activity is what creates and sustains an erection. This is why relaxation isn't just psychologically helpful, it's biologically necessary. The parasympathetic nervous system cannot operate efficiently when the sympathetic branch, the stress, fight or flight system, is dominant. Adrenaline, which floods the body under stress, causes vasoconstriction. It tightens blood vessels. It's directly antagonistic to the vasodilation required for erection. The second branch, the sympathetic nervous system, is responsible for ejaculation. As arousal intensifies, sympathetic activity increases, eventually triggering the muscular contractions of orgasm and ejaculation. The two branches work in sequence, and the transition between them is part of what makes the arousal to orgasm arc work. This dual-branch architecture has a practical implication. Men who are in a chronically elevated sympathetic state, chronically stressed, anxious, or sleep-deprived, are essentially operating with a biological brake applied to the arousal process. The parasympathetic system can't fully engage while the sympathetic system is on high alert. Now let's look at the hormonal layer. Because while the nervous system drives the immediate response, hormones set the stage. Testosterone is the primary hormonal driver of sexual desire, libido, in men. It sensitizes the brain's reward circuitry to sexual stimuli. Men with low testosterone typically report reduced sexual interest, not necessarily impaired physical function, though over time, low testosterone also affects the vascular mechanisms that erection depends on. Testosterone doesn't create arousal from nothing. It lowers the threshold. It makes the brain more responsive to arousing stimuli when they're present. Estrogen, which men produce in smaller amounts from testosterone, also plays a role. At the right levels, it contributes to healthy libido and vascular function. Too much, which can result from obesity, heavy alcohol consumption, or certain medications, suppresses testosterone and disrupts the hormonal balance that desire depends on. Prolactin is worth understanding because it explains a specific and common experience. After orgasm, prolactin levels rise sharply. This is the hormone primarily responsible for the post-orgasm refractory period. The window of time before arousal is possible again. Prolactin suppresses dopamine, blunts sexual interest, and contributes to the sense of satiation or fatigue after sex. The length of the refractory period varies significantly between individuals and increases with age, partly due to prolactin sensitivity and partly due to the slower recovery of the vascular and nervous system components. There's an important distinction in the arousal literature that's worth understanding: the difference between spontaneous and responsive desire. Spontaneous desire is the classic model. Arousal arises without direct stimulation. You notice attraction, you feel desire, and the physical response follows. For many men, especially when younger, this is the primary mode. It feels automatic, even insistent. Responsive desire is different. It arises in response to stimulation, physical touch, intimacy, context, rather than arising spontaneously beforehand. It's not absent desire. It's desire that needs to be initiated rather than simply felt. Research shows that responsive desire is entirely normal and becomes more common with age and in long-term relationships. It doesn't signal a problem with attraction or connection. It signals a shift in the arousal architecture. This distinction matters because men who experience more responsive desire and don't understand what's happening can misinterpret it as loss of interest or as something being wrong with them or their relationship. Understanding the difference can reframe what might feel like dysfunction as a normal variation in how arousal works. There's also a physical dimension to arousal that often goes unacknowledged: the role of the pelvic floor muscles. During arousal and erection, the ischiocavenosus and bulbocavenosus muscles, the primary muscles of the male pelvic floor, contract to compress the base of the penis and restrict venous outflow. This compression is what creates the pressure that maintains rigidity. Without sufficient muscle tone, blood can drain away too quickly, resulting in erections that are less firm or don't last. These muscles also play a role in the sensation and intensity of orgasm. Research has shown that pelvic floor dysfunction is independently associated with reduced sexual satisfaction, not just erectile difficulties, but diminished sensation and ejaculatory control. This is where targeted training becomes directly relevant. Kegel exercises, the structured contraction and relaxation of the pelvic floor, build tone and coordination in these muscles. A randomized controlled trial showed that pelvic floor training led to significant improvements in erectile function, with 40% of participants regaining normal function after 6 months. The Kegelmen app provides a guided, structured program to develop this muscular foundation, one that supports the vascular mechanics of arousal from the physical side. One more thing that shapes the arousal response, and is almost never discussed, is interoception. That's the brain's awareness of internal body states. Men with stronger interoceptive awareness, who are more attuned to physical sensations within their bodies, tend to have more consistent and robust arousal responses. This isn't mystical, it's neurological. The more clearly the brain receives and processes signals from the body, the more effectively it can coordinate the arousal cascade. Practices that build interoceptive awareness, mindful breathing, body scan techniques, yoga, and consistent physical training have measurable effects on sexual response, not because they're relaxing, though that helps too, but because they literally train the brain's ability to read and respond to its own internal signals. If there's one thing to take from this episode, it's this: arousal is a system. Brain, nervous system, hormones, blood vessels, muscles. Each layer contributes, and each layer can be supported or undermined. When something goes wrong, it's rarely just one thing, and when you invest in the whole system, the benefits compound. Next time on the Better Man podcast, we're tackling one of the most asked about topics in men's sexual health: pornography. What does the research actually say about its effects on arousal, desire, and function? Episode 8. The porn. Question: what the research actually says. I'm Alex. This is the Better Man podcast. See you next time.